Welcome back to Mycology Exploration. In this video, we're going to show you all the different ways that you can create agar. It is probably the most requested video, and we want to try to answer all of your questions in this one video. We love hearing from you in the comments. The husband reads your comments. He manages our channel here, and then he lets me know what you want to see more of. These bottles make it so much easier. It doesn't matter if you're using Petri dishes and you pressure cook these jars or no pour jars. These bottles are worth it. You do not have to use the stir plate. And if you see this magnet, the white magnet, it looks like a capsule inside. It came with the heated stir plate. In most of our videos, you will see the heated stir plate. Now, being a beginner, when we first started, the stir plate assisted. This heat gun, we highly recommend. Being able to monitor your temperature is vital. So if you're going to invest in anything, we say invest in the heat gun and these bottles. You can create your agar in the bottle or in a saucepan. And you don't even have to turn the burner on. You don't want to cook your agar. And we suggest you use boiling water. So heat purified water in a tea kettle, or if you have to heat it on the stove and boil some water, you can certainly do that. By placing something inside the bottle, we have a magnet from the stir plate. It breaks up the agar, so we highly recommend that you put something inside the jar if you're using the jar. And again, no heated stir plate on this, but we are using the magnet that comes with the heated stir plate. And you know, that's part of the convenience of the stir plate, is the magnet inside your jar is mixing and breaking up the agar and your ingredients for whatever recipe that you're creating. So you can create an agar water. You can create your own recipe. We have so many agar recipes. Or you can get this MEA blend. There's so many different MEA blends that are available. When you're using the heated stir plate, I don't even think you need to use the heat element if you're using boiling hot water. So really, the heated stir plate is just going to be there to be spitting that magnet in the bottle, and you can do that without the stir plate. Now, use some gloves here so that you don't burn yourself if you're going to use the bottle and mix the bottle, because you don't want to touch that bottle once you have boiling hot water. It's going to be hot. You can definitely keep your hand on the lid and swirl it around, but put on an oven mitt or gloves or use a towel so you don't burn yourself. If you're using the saucepan, you don't even have to turn your burner on. Now, I want to show you something. You really want to add your ingredients, especially your agar, first. Once the boiling hot water is introduced to the ingredients, especially the agar, it starts to congeal and it will create a mess around the top of the jar. So I highly recommend that you put your ingredients in your pot or the bottle first, then add your boiling hot water, because you're going to have all this moisture and all this condensation coming out of the top. Even if you're using a pot, you're going to have tons of condensation, the steam from the boiling hot water. And once you're placing your ingredients, especially that agar, over the top, even with a spoon, it's going to start getting wet and moist. So you really want to keep your agar and all your ingredients dry. And you want to keep even the spoon that you're going to be using in the dry ingredients dry so that it's not clumping up on you. So again, put your ingredients in first. Then you're going to add your boiling hot water. And then you're going to want to stir, 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 mix, mix, mix. So again, you don't need the stir plate, but you would need in the jar something to mix it around, and you don't want it to break your jar. And then with your saucepan, you're just going to stir it, stir it, stir it until it's all dissolved. Now you're going to need to pressure cook. So if you do the Petri dishes, then you would pressure cook in a jar first. So the saucepan with Petri dishes is going to make it really difficult because you're going to need to pressure cook before you pour to Petri dish. If you do the no pour technique, that's where you pour it to your jars first and then you pressure cook. So you could use a saucepan and a spoon and then pour to your jars, then pressure cook. So we recommend pressure cooking 20 minutes at 15 psi for most of your agar recipes. You don't want to caramelize the sugars, the dextrose. And of course, when it comes to sugar, we're not talking about cane sugar. It's a dextrose. And that would be more like honey. And so if you were to cook on a stovetop and a saucepan, you could caramelize all that. And then you're going to pressure cook on top of that. So if you use the boiling hot water, there's no need to turn on the stovetop. And again, we haven't even been using our stir plate. And we turned off the heat. So at the very beginning, we used the stir plate and we used the heat and the stir. And then we realized we didn't even need the heat when we used the boiling hot water. And we just used the stir. And then the husband realized we don't even need the stir. He can just mix it in the jar. Super easy. And we only do no pour jars now. So what we would do is create the agar, pour it to the jars, and then pressure cook our jars. Okay, let me know your comments, your questions. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking. YouTube really doesn't share our videos, but we make them for you guys. So share it out. We appreciate you.
Spores are inherently dirty. They just are. Even if you're getting the best spores, and if you're working with the spore prints that you created, they are dirty. There is contamination, and that's okay. The point is, you put the spores to agar, and we recommend that when you're working with spores, you do a water agar. It's just purified water and agar, so there's no sugars or nutrients for contamination to feed on. It's a little bit slower grow for your spores in the water agar, or you can do an incredibly light MEA. And that way you give your spores the opportunity to grow out on the agar plates. And then you can transfer those, eliminating contamination. Every time you do a transfer to a new plate, you're eliminating contamination. And then once you have these plates that have a rhizomorphic growth, again, antlers, the branches, very white and thick, you can put those to your grain. So I wanted to show you that we actually used this grow kit when we first got started as an experiment, and we used spores. And so it's really interesting looking through the directions and kind of where we started. And we started with inoculating a bag like this. So the kit came with a syringe. However, we didn't use the syringe because we didn't have any liquid culture we didn't have any mycelium. And so what we were able to do was order liquid spores. So it's spores and liquid. So we ordered syringes of spores for all the mushrooms we wanted to grow. And at the beginning, we inoculated these grain bags through a kit. And it took so long to inoculate that grain bag. It really did. But it colonized. So we allowed the spores to germinate in the bag. And once that colonized, then we moved it to the substrate. And once the substrate colonized, then we had fruiting conditions. And again, the spores were just not something that we wanted. So if you receive, no matter how you get your spores, whether it's in the liquid, in a syringe, there's so many ways that spores come. And you can also make a spore print yourself with foil. So when you have a spore, no matter how you have it, you can simply put it to an agar dish, an agar plate, a no-pour jar like we have in here, and allow your spore to grow out to mycelium. You can also clone fresh or wet fruits. That's right, you can. So no matter what mushroom you're wanting to grow, if you could get your hands on a fresh version of that, you can clone that. So whether you have the wet or fresh mushroom, you can clone. Whether you have the spores, you can turn the spores into mycelium. And that's what we recommend, because you're going to be so much happier with the fruits from mycelium.
MEA, or malt extract agar, is the go-to agar recipe for home mycologists. It provides the perfect adjustable recipe for growing out contaminant-free mycelium cultures.
The great thing that we have discovered with malt extract is you can adjust the amount of nutrients and dextrose according to how much you want to feed your cultures.
We started with the standard 10-gram agar, 10-gram malt extract per 500 milliliters of purified water and definitely got quick tomentose growth, but it was hard to determine what was good mycelium and what was possible contamination. We have since come up with a standard MEA recipe that works to promote the onset of rhizomorphic growth while reducing the chance of contamination by using a 10-gram agar, 7.5-gram malt extract to 500 milliliters of purified water. Through much research, we found that adjusting levels of nutrients really changed the growth to a more rhizomorphic pattern.
Multiple transfers using different agar recipes helped us achieve the growth we were looking for. When we dialed back the malt extract a little, the mycelium seemed to stretch out, searching for nutrients while containing and/or eliminating any contamination.
When cloning or working with spores, we have found water agar to be the best recipe to start with. We then transfer to MEA plates, then a final transfer to MYA gives us the rhizomorphic growth we desire. There seems to be some confusion around malt extract and light malt extract. There are various malt extracts including light, amber, extra light, pilsen, wheat, rye, and even dark extracts which are used for brewing various styles of beer. All indicators show that any malt extract will work, but it seems that light malt extract is preferred in mycology. The malt extract we use and that is shown in our videos is actually a light malt extract. Using 500 milliliters of boiling, purified, or distilled water, mix 10 grams of agar and 7.5 grams of malt extract. Pressure cook for no longer than 20 minutes at 15 psi so you don't caramelize the sugars or overcook the nutrients. Allow the MEA to cool between 120 and 140 degrees, then you're ready to pour.
And how you do not need a heated stir plate to create agar recipes. You don't need it. We do, however, use the magnets that came with the heated stir plate. We love these bottles. They make everything so much easier. A big fan of these bottles. You can pressure cook them. They're amazing. However, I'm going to show you a way to make your agar in a pan. You don't even have to turn your stovetop on. So there's 2 different ways here that you can make agar without a heated stir plate. The bottles make it so much easier, and especially if you're going to be pouring to Petri dishes, meaning you're going to pressure cook and then pour to Petri dishes, the bottles are kind of a must-have because you can't pressure cook the pan full of agar, but you can pressure cook these bottles. So when you have the magnet on the stir plate, that magnet inside spins around, but you don't need the stir plate because you can just spin it yourself. You just swirl the bottle around. And you don't need the heat element because you're going to use boiling hot water for all your agar recipes. It's so easy when you use boiling hot water. And by boiling hot water, that means you're going to boil water and then add it to your dry ingredients. So you're not going to be using that pan to boil your water. The heated stir plate at the beginning, it made sense. But then when we got really good at making agar, the husband was like, we don't even need this. It overcomplicates it. Let's just add boiling hot water. So I want to show you 2 different ways that you can make any agar recipe without the heated stir plate. And again, you don't need to heat anything other than boiling your water, your hot water. And I've got my kettle going right now. So we have used these MEA blends. And you're still going to have to measure out those blends depending on how much agar you want to make. Now, these blends come with instructions on how to create it. And it's always recommended to pressure cook your agar for 15 to 20 minutes at 15 psi and to not overcook to caramelize the sugars. So there is a sugar in the malt barley extract that is similar to honey, and you don't want to burn those, caramelize those. You also want to keep all of your dry ingredients dry. That's why I put a silica packet in with that MEA blend. Keeping everything dry is actually highly recommended. I think it's really important because if anything's wet, the dry ingredients will stick to it and it'll be sticky. The sugars will make it sticky, but also the agar is a gel. It becomes gelatin, so it starts to congeal, and you'll just have a mess. So add your dry ingredients to your bottle or your pan first. So when you measure out your dry ingredients, keep it clean and dry. You can see how dry this agar is. Keep everything dry, because if you add any wetness to your ingredients in the packages, you'll ruin your ingredients. So with your ingredients here, use dry spoons, dry ways of measuring. And so here on the scale, I already have our malt barley extract. It's a light malt barley extract. And I'm going to add the agar. Again, I'm not doing an exact recipe here. I just want to show you the process, but you're going to get exact measurements, and we have videos for all of our recipes. We use a water agar, we use an MEA recipe, and an MYA recipe with nutritional yeast. So we like to use 3 different plates, whether we're cloning or transferring. We do the water agar, which is just water and agar. Then we do an MEA, and we do an MYA with that nutritional yeast. We love the nutritional yeast. So I put the agar in first, and now I'm putting in the malt barley extract. And again, this is not a recipe that I'm following right now. I just want to show you putting in your dry ingredients first, keeping it all dry. So you can see on the bottle, I didn't get any of the dry ingredients around the lid, the mouth of that bottle, keeping that dry, because when you add this boiling hot water, you'll see all the condensation. So if there were any ingredients around the top of that bottle, it would start congealing and getting sticky. With the pan, it's really easy. You'll just put your dry ingredients in, add your boiling hot water. So with the bottle, I'm just going to swirl it, and the magnet is going to break all the dry ingredients up, and you'll see how fast it dissolves. I mean, even in the pan, you can see how fast the ingredients are dissolving. And I'm going to get a thermometer here for you in just a minute so you can see the temperature on this. So the one in the bottle is ready to go. And the pan, just a few little stirs here, and it's perfect. So after everything has dissolved, this would be a perfect time to add food coloring if you were going to add a drop of food coloring. We just did a video and a shorts on the food coloring and why you would use food coloring for home mycology. And I really loved the comment on that video that said, well, it's just cool. It's just cool to add the food coloring. It is. It looks amazing. And the color contrast makes the mycelium pop on your dishes. So here you can see everything is ready. It's dissolved. It looks great. There's no clumping of any dry ingredients. Look how clean everything is. It was that easy. So let's get a temperature on this. It's going to be in the 160s. And it cools quickly. It cools quickly. I definitely recommend if you're going to be pouring to no pour jars that you make sure you get them poured before it cools to under 140 degrees. So don't wait to pour your no pour jars. As soon as it's ready, you can go ahead and start pouring your jars. With the no pour jar technique, the pan works perfectly because you'll be pouring that agar to your jars and then pressure cooking. If you're using the Petri dishes, then you would use the bottle. You would pressure cook your bottle first and then pour to Petri dishes in your still air box or in front of your vent. So here's a no pour jar. That simple, that easy. You don't pour a lot. You want it to be really thin. Most of these jars have a little bump up in the middle, so the outer will be a little bit thicker than the center. So when I pour the no pour jars, I just want to make sure that we've covered the center of the jar. There's enough agar layer in the center because most of the clones and transfers will go in the center of the jar. So you can see how quick, just when I poured that, it cooled in the jar. And when agar begins to cool, again, under 140 degrees, it starts to congeal and get thick. So pour all of your jars before your agar cools. You're going to need to put a lid on there. And we've talked about flipping the lids. You can certainly flip your lid to have some ventilation, but you'll need to put foil over that before you put it in your pressure cooker. So if you flip your lids on your no pour jars, add foil to the top. If you do not flip your lids, there's no need to add foil to the top. It'll create a suction, and that's ready to go in the pressure cooker. With the bottle, you would pressure cook that, and then again, you would pour to your Petri dish in your still air box or in front of your vent. So there is no need to have any kind of heat element when you use boiling hot water. It's that easy.
When working with spores or cloning best fruits, it is always our goal to create a liquid culture. Liquid culture is mycelium suspended in nutrition. It's like a liquid Petri dish without the agar in a jar. To achieve this, whether we're starting with spores or cloning, we begin the process with agar dishes. You may have seen our water agar video where we share our base agar recipe. It is simply agar and boiling purified water. Water agar has proven for us to be the best recipe when dealing with spores and clones. The idea behind water agar is to give just enough nutrients for the mycelium to branch out while giving very little nutrients for contamination to grow. The resulting growth is generally enough to be able to transfer a clean sample to a more nutrient-dense dish to continue the transferring process. As this process evolves, you will add nutrients to further encourage rhizomorphic growth so you can clearly tell where the best entry points for transfers are occurring. We have discovered that less nutrients seem to be best when it comes to rhizomorphic growth. It seems that if you starve the mycelium, it really branches out to search for more nutrients, resulting in a branched look similar to a root system. The more nutrients you add, it seems to spread out in a more fluffy tomentose style, eating on all the abundance. As you research, you find that rhizomorphic and tomentose will both produce beautiful mushrooms, but it's easier to determine the most viable points to make successful transfers due to the antlering and rhizomorphic growth.
Our water agar recipe is simply 10 grams of agar to 500 milliliters of purified boiling water.
MEA, or malt extract agar, is the go-to agar recipe for home mycologists. It provides the perfect adjustable recipe for growing out contaminant-free mycelium cultures.
The great thing that we have discovered with malt extract is you can adjust the amount of nutrients and dextrose according to how much you want to feed your cultures.
We started with the standard 10-gram agar, 10-gram malt extract per 500 milliliters of purified water and definitely got quick tomentose growth, but it was hard to determine what was good mycelium and what was possible contamination. We have since come up with a standard MEA recipe that works to promote the onset of rhizomorphic growth while reducing the chance of contamination by using a 10-gram agar, 7.5-gram malt extract to 500 milliliters of purified water. Through much research, we found that adjusting levels of nutrients really changed the growth to a more rhizomorphic pattern.
When we dialed back the malt extract a little, the mycelium seemed to stretch out, searching for nutrients while containing and/or eliminating any contamination.
When cloning or working with spores, we have found water agar to be the best recipe to start with. We then transfer to MEA plates, then a final transfer to MYA gives us the rhizomorphic growth we desire. There seems to be some confusion around malt extract and light malt extract. There are various malt extracts including light, amber, extra light, pilsen, wheat, rye, and even dark extracts which are used for brewing various styles of beer. All indicators show that any malt extract will work, but it seems that light malt extract is preferred in mycology. The malt extract we use and that is shown in our videos is actually a light malt extract. Using 500 milliliters of boiling, purified, or distilled water, mix 10 grams of agar and 7.5 grams of malt extract. Pressure cook for no longer than 20 minutes at 15 psi so you don't caramelize the sugars or overcook the nutrients. Allow the MEA to cool between 120 and 140 degrees, then you're ready to pour. MYA, or malt yeast agar, is an amazing agar recipe. This recipe gives the perfect nutritional source from the malt extract, but the addition of nutritional yeast will promote that booming rhizomorphic growth in your mycelium cultures. Nutritional yeast can be found in most health stores or online and comes in various forms from powdered to large flake. Both of these are good, but you do want to make sure you grind it to as fine of a powder as you can.
We experimented with many different recipes and we really feel like we perfected this one. So when creating 500 milliliters, you want to use 10 grams of agar, 7.5 grams of malt extract, 0.25 grams of nutritional yeast. Yes, that's 0.25 grams of the nutritional yeast, again, to create 500 milliliters. When working with the nutritional yeast, even when you created a fine powder, it will leave a cloudiness to your agar and particulates. We've tried straining this out and it's still there and it's okay. We have not experienced any contamination. It's been a really positive recipe with just so much rhizomorphic growth. So the particulates and the cloudiness are just not a problem at all.
I am set up to do some cloning. I'm just going to take 6 little samples of the inside of 3 different mushrooms. So I'm going to take 2 samples per mushroom from the inside, and I take from the inside of the cap and the bottom part of the stem. So 2 each mushroom. And I always choose mushrooms in a cluster, a really healthy cluster to clone. So I don't pick the big ones, I pick the healthy clusters. And I wanted to show you these no-pore agar jars and something that we're going to be experimenting with. So here is the still air box, and I just popped it right on my oven top here. I have a flat oven top, and I'm going to sanitize and put gloves on, of course. But I wanted to show you what happens when you flip the lids on the no-pore jar and this very light MEA recipe. So usually when we clone, the first plate, as we've shared with you, is water agar to eliminate contamination. However, that is very slow to grow in water agar. So the husband has this theory of an incredibly light MEA. So we're giving this a go, and you can see how light it is. We didn't put any food coloring in these jars. I also wanted to share with you kind of what I do when I flip the lids. So to help with the condensation in the no-pore jars, we have determined after an experiment to flip the lids. We did it at the beginning, and then we just kind of stopped and forgot why, and it was because it reduces the condensation. There's a little venting. So if you flip the lids before you pressure cook for 20 minutes at 15 psi, you'll need to put foil on top. And then what I do is I just take the foil off as the agar is cooling on a flat surface so we can get a nice level jar or plate. And then I lay down 2 alcohol-soaked paper towels here in this still air box. And I open the no-pore jars and immediately turn them upside down on the alcohol paper towel. And as you can see, all the condensation on the top of the lid from the pressure cooking. And so I actually have the part of the lid that's going to be closest to the agar is down on the alcohol paper towel. And I will just put the transfer right in the center of these plates, no-pore jars. And I will pop the clean lid right on top and then put the ring around it. And then I flip the jars right side up until the mycelium starts to grow. And then I flip them upside down just like this so that I can see the growth. So again, once the mycelium really starts to grow out on the plate from a clone or a transfer, then you can just flip it upside down so you can see what's happening through the bottom. And I shared with you in another video that we recommend you get the clear glass jars so you can see. However, you can see we have some quilted jars as well. And when you flip them upside down, you can see what's happening. So that's a little bit of a tip and secret with the no-pore jar to see what's happening inside. And so I will alcohol and clean and wear gloves. And then we will get on cloning.
I want to make this easy and in the simplest terms possible. The no-pour technique does involve pouring. The main difference is in the fact that you pour your media before you pressure cook so that you don't have to pour after your media has been sterilized. By media, I mean your personal agar recipes.
It's a matter of whether you're going to pour your agar recipe first and then pressure cook it, or pressure cook it first and then pour it. So normally, people would be using plastic Petri dishes. There are glass Petri dishes, and many people do use this no-pour technique with glass Petri dishes where you pressure cook after you've poured. But for the sake of keeping this simple, in this video, we're going to refer to Petri dishes as being plastic. So like we shared in previous videos, when using Petri dishes, which we love the convenience and the ease of Petri dishes. So if you are a beginner and new to mycology, we suggest that you do start with Petri dishes. So typically when pouring to Petri dishes, you would pressure cook your agar. Then you would pour it in a still air box, a sterile environment. And you would not parafilm right after pouring so that there would be a slight airflow exchange to work out some of the condensation that you would most likely get on that dish. We recommend you just flip your dish upside down. After you transfer or clone, that's when you would parafilm your Petri dish. So let's talk about the no pour technique in glass jars. The number one thing that we have found is the condensation. There is quite a bit of condensation within the glass jars. This may be different depending on where you live and your weather and your humidity. We've worked through this and we actually have not had any contamination, so it has not been a problem, but it has been a noticeable difference. Early on, we watched a video that gave a great tip on flipping the lid to your jar upside down to help reduce moisture, that this gives some airflow. However, we have not noticed a difference between flipping the lid and not flipping the lid when it comes to moisture. However, if you're going to flip your lid upside down, you definitely need to add foil before you pressure cook. Another suggestion is when you flip your lid, you don't have the pressure buildup. So when you go to open your no pour technique jars, there's pressure on them. And when you're trying to manage that within a still air box, you can fumble, you can rip your gloves, trying to use your nails to open the tight pressure of that lid. So that is a handy technique to flip the lid, so it's easy. However, you just need to make sure you're sterilizing that lid. We highly recommend that you use 4-ounce jars that are unquilted. Non-quilted jars are what you want so that you can easily see moisture and growth and what's happening within this dish or this jar. Again, Petri dishes for beginners are wonderful because you can easily see through the plastic or the glass Petri dish. A little bit more difficult with the jar. However, when you use the clear glass, the unquilted, you can simply turn it upside down when it begins to grow on your agar and use a flashlight to see that growth. You can even see the rhizomorphic through the glass jar. One other tip is that when you begin to pour your jars, there is a little center bump up on the bottom of the jar, so it doesn't sit as flat as maybe you think it does. So you might have to pour it a little bit thicker because your center layer will end up being a little bit thinner than the outside layer of agar. So when you do your clones or your transfers, you can just drop them right in the center. A helpful suggestion is after you've already done your no pour jars and you pull them out to use them for a clone or a transfer, is to just go ahead and take all the rings off before you slip them into your still air box. Just that extra step of dealing with the ring inside your box is just really unneeded and it adds more possible contamination. So just take your rings off before you put them in your still air box. We really want to take a minute to talk to you about pressure cooking. We've received a lot of comments and we love the discussions that are happening between all of you within the comments about the pressure cooker. Without a doubt, the pressure cooker we feel is the most important investment that you can make. And we also want to be clear that we use the Duo Crisp Instant Pot. So it does fluctuate between 13 and 15 psi, and there have been studies done on the Duo Crisp Instant Pot, the model that we use, and you can check out our sanitization video about that. Another reason why we chose the Duo Crisp Instant Pot is it is also a dehydrator, so it really served us, and financially it made sense for us to invest in something that not only was the best pressure cooker that met those scientific requirements for mycology, but also serves as a dehydrator. The standard rule on agar recipes is typically 20 minutes at 15 psi. So we recommend that you pour all your jars, and if you flip your lids, we suggest that you put foil on top so no water gets in or out, and that you pressure cook that for 20 minutes at 15 psi. When you're finished with the pressure cooking, carefully remove all of your jars. Be careful not to slosh the agar up along the sides of the jar. You want to keep it flat until it cools off. Once it's cooled completely to room temperature, you can just flip those jars right upside down, allowing all the condensation to drip down the sides or move to the lid, so that when you go to do your transfer or your clone, you can wipe that extra condensation out. We have saved so much money in just investing in jars, and we also use these same small jars for bird seed for our grain. Many of you have asked in the comments why we use small jars for grain, and the answer is to eliminate risk. We're spreading it out, especially when we've started something new and we want it to grow quickly, but we want to eliminate any contamination or risk. It's easier just to use a lot of small jars instead of putting all your eggs into one basket, all of your mycelium into one jar. But we do use all size jars for grain. We have small, medium, and large size jars for that. However, with the no pour technique, it's a great money saver with using these small jars that we already use on the bird seed. One last tip that we have for you is cleaning these jars. Yes, you can pressure cook them to clean them. So if you want to use our great technique for cleaning jars, what we do is fill up a bucket of soapy water, and as we are finished with whether it's a grain jar or an agar jar, we just dump it straight into a soapy bucket. Then we rinse it in hot water in the sink, and we just re-pressure cook everything.
In trying to research different types of agar recipes, we found it difficult to locate which types there are and what actual recipes work to benefit mycelium growth. In one of our previous videos, we discussed how to make an MEA, or malt extract agar. We found that the results were amazing after we made our transfers, but we weren't getting that amazing rhizomorphic growth we wanted. Through much research and many transfers, we found the perfect recipe to get that beautiful rhizomorphic growth we wanted. MYA, or malt yeast agar, is an amazing agar recipe. This recipe gives the perfect nutritional source from the malt extract, but the addition of nutritional yeast will promote that booming rhizomorphic growth in your mycelium cultures. Nutritional yeast can be found in most health stores or online and comes in various forms from powdered to large flake. Both of these are good, but you do want to make sure you grind it to as fine of a powder as you can.
We experimented with many different recipes, and we really feel like we perfected this one. So when creating 500 milliliters, you want to use 10 grams of agar, 7.5 grams of malt extract, 0.25 grams of nutritional yeast. Yes, that's 0.25 grams of the nutritional yeast, again, to create 500 milliliters. When working with the nutritional yeast, even when you created a fine powder, it will leave a cloudiness to your agar and particulates. We've tried straining this out and it's still there, and it's okay. We have not experienced any contamination. It's been a really positive recipe with just so much rhizomorphic growth. So the particulates and the cloudiness are just not a problem at all.
Pressure cook for no longer than 20 minutes at 15 psi so you don't caramelize the sugars or overcook the nutrients.
About agar and color. Why do people add food coloring to their agar? Well, I think there's two reasons that people add food coloring to their agar, and all you need is one drop. You just add one drop of food coloring to your agar recipe as it's cooling and before you put it in the pressure cooker. And it doesn't matter if you're creating the no-pour jars or the Petri dish. Just 1 drop is all you need. And I really think it's so that you can see the mycelium growth on your plates and your no-pour jars. We've actually received quite a few comments recently about people having a hard time seeing the mycelium growth on their dishes or in their no-pour jars. So the food coloring could create that contrast of color, and the mycelium will be white. So we actually love using the blue food coloring because you can really see that white mycelium. It's just gorgeous. And the blue really does create this clean agar effect. The other reason would be to color code your agar dishes and no-pour jars by recipe. So we do a water agar, an MEA, and an MYA. So we will color those in 3 different colors so we know which dish we're looking at. So it makes it really easy to not confuse which recipe or agar dish that you're looking at. This here in the video is an MEA recipe with the blue food coloring. And you will need to pressure cook these no-pour jars or your bottle over here before you pour your Petri dishes in a still air box or in front of your flow hood. So those will need to go in the pressure cooker 20 minutes at 15 psi. So the only difference with adding the food coloring is just adding 1 drop to what you're already doing. And again, you can make each recipe a different color. Advanced mycologists do not add food coloring to their Petri dishes. They will use an actual blood agar dish or a whatever color the dish is for whatever it is that they're trying to grow. So there is charcoal, which creates a black Petri dish. Again, the blood creates a red Petri dish or an orange dish. It's actually fascinating to learn about the colored agar dishes from a mycologist, not a home mycologist, that doesn't use food coloring.